Probably the throw that we hear the most about is the overhand throw. And it's a throw that every softball player needs to be able to execute, but some will very rarely use it. Again, throwing is situational. Distance is one of the parts that makes throwing situational. If the distance is long, and that could be 60 feet for a 6-year-old girl, it could be 150 feet before it involves the 26-year-old Olympian or whatever. The distance has something to do with how you throw. The overhand throw is the longest of the arm actions, and it allows you to generate probably the greatest velocity. This is why you see baseball pitchers throwing overhanded most of the time. They're trying to gain that velocity. So we need to be able to throw overhanded. But it's also the throw that takes the longest, because the arm has to go from the receiving position downward, backward, back up again, and then over and down again. So there's a long time that the fielder is keeping the ball. So it's a throw that a second baseman might rarely make, because she's typically throwing somewhere from 10 to 40 or 50 feet. Now in a relay, she might need the overhand throw, although if she's got much arm strength, a full overhand throw then particularly takes too long. So realize the overhand throw is very valuable. You need to be able to do it because a situation comes up where you need that arm strength and velocity. So learn the overhand throw. That's what we're getting ready to do here right now. But realize that it's probably the most overused throw in the game of softball. Practice it so that it's there when you need it in your repertoire, but realize that it takes a lot of time, and therefore it probably should be avoided except when it is needed. Let's look at how we can learn that overhand throw so that you're ready for that need whenever it arises. One of the important parts about throwing is to get a good grip on the ball. A good way to do that is to get the fingers across the wide seams. If you'll notice here, the seams are wider than they are here. They're also wider here and some other places along the ball. You could say that it makes a C or is a horseshoe, whichever way you want to look at that. You might can do it with 2 fingers. Glenna Ruth, who might have hands smaller than me, is likely to have to use 3 fingers to do that. And if you'll notice, she's got the pads or the last joint or the ends of the fingers on a seam so that she's got a good grip on the ball. And if you'll look underneath the ball, she's got a thumb trying to find another seam. She also tries as much as she can with the size of her hand to get some room in between the ball and her hand. If you get it jammed too far back in there, it's tight, it doesn't come out as well, the wrist snap is restricted somewhat, and so she's doing the things properly here to make the ball make a good 6-12 rotation. If you remember the hands of a clock, you get the ball with all 4 seams spinning backwards, and you get a 6-12 rotation. It adds velocity to the ball, helps the ball go straight and true and carry better, and it doesn't dip or dive or slide along the way. Just a much better way to throw the ball. It's based on a scientific principle, if you want to impress some people, maybe called a Bernoulli principle, about bodies moving through fluids like air. Actually, Glenna Ruth doesn't have to know that, but now she does, and she can impress the other members of her class maybe at school. But she gets a good 6-12 rotation, the ball carries a lot better. A lot of players will tell you that you don't have time to get the right grip, that you have to just get the ball and throw it. And in a few cases, that's actually true. But in pulling the ball out of your glove, you're going to reach back, as we worked on these throws earlier, and you've got some time between the time you grip the ball, pulling it out of your glove, until the release of the ball to get the proper grip. Certainly you won't reach into the glove, take time, find the right grip. You don't have time to do that. But as you bring the ball from the glove to the throwing position, you can be rolling it around in your hand and get a proper grip. It's going to help the ball carry true and strong, and you just got to work at this. It's a very simple drill. You can do it as you stand around throwing. You can do it as you sit on the bench. You can do it sitting on a couch watching television. A number of ways to work on this, and just as you walk around with a glove, throw the ball into it and work on getting it out of the glove properly so that you've got the good grip and get that 6-12 rotation we talked about. One of the traditional ways of teaching the overhand throw is to relate it to something that's very similar to that, and that similar motion is swimming. If you'll watch people taking swimming lessons, the arm action of swimming is a lot like the arm action for the overhand throw. We're going to start them, however, with something a little different than just the swimming motion. We filmed a video 12 or 15 years ago with my daughter when she was 10 or 11 years old, and she told me in the middle of that video, she said, the first thing I learned, Daddy, in swimming was a dog paddle. And it kind of gave us an idea, and so we're going to start with the dog paddle. And these two players, as you watch them doing their dog paddle, you'll see the wrists are flipping and snapping, and after 3 or 4 dog paddles, they'll actually just flip the ball into the fence, and that's a great way to work on the wrist snap, which is the last part of the throwing motion when you throw a softball overhanded. Now we'll get them doing the regular swimming motion. They'll just swim, and after every 2 or 3 times around, they'll throw a ball into the fence. This is not exactly like the overhand throwing motion, but it's very similar. It'll help players learn to stop short arming the ball or just bringing it up and kind of pushing the ball. They'll get a full motion of the overhand throw. It's a great drill to practice overhand throwing, go through the sequence of learning to do the swimming motion, and include the dog paddle if you want to have a little bit of fun with the wrist snap. They'll do 1 or 2 more, and then we'll move to something else. Another way to practice the overhand throw is what I would call a sequence of scratch drills, and I actually personally like these better than the swimming drills that we've done traditionally for a number of years now. The overhand throwing motion starts with the hand on top of the ball, and it comes back, goes up, and back over again. So the hand kind of comes down, back, up, and down, creating somewhat of a circle where the bottom half of the circle is cut off. We're going to have these young ladies do the same type of thing in what we call an isolation drill. We're working on the arm action, so we're taking the legs away from them, and you'll see them placing a ball by their knee and pulling it back along the ground in the same action. So go ahead and do that, ladies, and just pull the ball back, and it's the same throwing action, and they'll throw the ball now against the fence. And just pull back, reach up, and pull over. And just pull back, reach up, and pull over. And it's the same throwing action as they do this. It's very similar, almost exactly like the overhand throwing motion, but by having the ball on the ground and taking their legs away from them, it gives them a good way to work at this. With this scratching the ground drill, you'll get some players, as you see here, just reach back to their shoulder, basically pull the ball up and push it. We call that short arming the ball. They don't get the full overhand motion. Years ago they called it throwing like a girl, but that's changed considerably in the last few years. It's just basically throwing incorrectly. It's short arming the ball rather than using the long arm that gives you the power of an overhand throw. So what we'll do with Kate here is put her where she's throwing with the fence behind her, or it could be a wall in your house or whatever, and you'll see her pull the ball back now till it finds that fence and then climbs up and then throws. And she'll keep that elbow up above shoulder high or so, up around the shoulder of the ear, and it makes her reach back. Before she was just pulling the ball about halfway back and again getting a short arm throw. This drill will help her correct that by forcing her to reach back until she feels the fence or the wall, and then she climbs up and makes a good overhand throw like she's doing right now. A great drill for helping to correct the player that wants to short arm the ball. Okay, from being sitting on the ground, we're still isolated, but we changed the phase of this. We moved now to where they're kneeling down, and Catherine is basically just going to scratch Cade's back. Same motion, going all the way back, coming back up and over, getting the elbow up above the shoulder, and just scratching her entire back. Again, it's the same overhand throwing motion, but it's kind of a fun drill. They like this. Kate said it felt good to have her back scratched, and it creates that throwing motion that we had a minute ago when they were laying on the ground or kind of sitting on the ground with their feet extended. And so this is just progressing to where you're kneeling instead of sitting. Another good progression here to teach the overhand throw. Now sometimes, and actually Catherine's going to fake this for us, sometimes they just bring the ball back and short arm it like Cade was doing a while ago, and just go about halfway down the back and then push the ball. If that happens, the partner that's kneeling down should say that the bottom of my back or the lower back itches also, so scratch the whole thing. So this time Catherine go all the way back and show it again the correct way, going all the way back to the lower back and getting the complete overhand throw. Good job. The next to last stage in our progression is actually standing up, getting turned sideways, and using something about waist high. And you're going to scratch a table here or anything like that. Could be a desk, whatever you can find. Could be the bleacher seat even. And Glenna Ruth is doing this now. She just pulls the ball back, and now instead of being sitting with her feet extended or kneeling and scratching a back, she's standing up, which is more like the regular throwing motion. We'll eventually progress to where they throw without any of these aids, if you want to call it that, and they get out and just imagine that the air has the ground or the back or the table on it. Now, the only thing about this drill, it can be done just about anywhere, but Glenna Ruth has got to be sure she doesn't go home and do this on her mother's antique oak table that belonged to her great-grandmother, or she'll be in serious trouble. But it is a great way to practice the overhand throw, the correct arm action while you do that. Okay. Eventually, at the end of this progression, you'd like them to be able to transfer this to regular throwing. I mean, it's got to be reality-based. It's got to be game-like. So we watch them out there now, and they're trying to imagine that they're dragging the ball across the ground, that they're scratching a partner's back, that they're moving the ball across a table. So in their mind, they're going back to the drill where we isolated, either with the feet extended while you're sitting, while you're scratching somebody's back when you're kneeling, or when you're standing and dragging the ball across a table. In their mind, that's what they're doing, but there's no ground, there's no back, there's no table now, and so it's just independent of that, and they're dragging the ball back through the air. And again, the ball's going down, back, up, and over. They're keeping their hand on top of the ball as they pull it back so that it's in a good throwing motion when they're ready to release the ball. The final way to work on the overhand throw is what we call the whole part method. Greg Riddock showed us this in one of the videos he did earlier for Higher Ground. We're going to repeat it here today with Catherine. Going to kind of go from the end of the throw back to the start of the throw. So we're going to work on the wrist snap to start with. She's basically just going to hold her arm steady and just flick the ball with the wrist. She's isolating the wrist, and she's doing a great job of it. A lot of times players will move the whole elbow and everything, the arm from the elbow down, but she's got the wrist isolated. She wants to make sure she keeps a good high elbow in this, just like a normal throwing motion, so the elbow should stay at least as high as the shoulder. Now she's going to go to the phase that happens in throwing right before that, as she just lays back the arm and now uses the bottom part of the arm or from the forearm down through the wrist and the fingers. So she's using that joint, using the bottom half of the arm and ending up with the wrist snap. So it just added a phase right before that. In the actual throwing motion that happens right before this happens, the body's turned sideways and she's going to lay the ball back, kind of point it toward a wall, and then just turn and throw. Again, notice that the elbow is high, at least as high as the shoulder. She's seeing the ball pointed back, and then as her body turns, the ball turns. So it's pointed back, turn, snap the wrist as the forearm extends. She's now going to start right after the last repetition of this, somewhat like a baseball pitcher in the set position. It's kind of like a receiving position when you've received a throw. And she's going to pull the ball back now with her hand on top, go to the stage right before this one that you saw earlier. And so now she's in the final phase where she pulls the ball back from the receiving position. Notice again, the hand is on top. She points it to the back, turns and extends the arm and flicks the wrist again. It's a whole part method of showing the overhand throw and breaking it down into the parts, putting it all together into the whole when you start at the end and go back to the beginning. We spent a lot of time talking about the upper body and what the arm action is and the wrist snap and all of those kind of things, but a lot of the force of a throw comes from the lower body. It's the strongest part of the body, so we've got to learn to use it. Notice that Catherine's turning her back foot perpendicular to the line of force of the throw, and she's getting her body turned. The front foot, or the foot that's on the side of your body that the glove is on, takes a step toward her target. She points the lead shoulder, or again, the glove side shoulder at her target, and then that hip rotation, because of that body position, allows her to put a lot more force into the throw. Got to get the good body turn, the hip rotation, and then you're using the entire body, not just the arm and the elbow and the wrist and that type of thing, but a good complete body throw here.